Fancy Farm is a tiny community in Graves County, Kentucky. Once a year, its population swells into the thousands. Some of those, major national politicians, like Vice Presidents Al Gore and Alvin Barkley, and 1976 presidential candidate George Wallace. Others are more local, like Senator Mitch McConnell, a longtime fixture of the event.
A lot of hot air coming from that platform, I bet, shortly. You better get ready.
For the last 145 years, the community has been home to the annual St. Jerome Fancy Farm Picnic, which advertises itself as the world's largest one-day barbecue. It's a tradition rooted in decades of community history. Families play specific roles in organizing and running the event.
When I was a young lad back in the 60s, the Wilson family, we were over the lemonade stand. And that's when you had fresh squeezed lemonade.
That's co-chairman of the political committee at Fancy Farm, Mark Wilson. In that role, he's continuing on a legacy of generations of his family.
We went to the stand where we cut up the barbecue, mutton and pork, that was going to the cafeteria for the dinner that's held all day. So myself and my brothers and my dad and a few others, we would chop the meat.
The hallmarks of Fancy Farm? Barbecue, games, and stump speeches from political hopefuls. All of that to raise money for St. Jerome Catholic Church in Fancy Farm. This year's picnic, which kicks off on Saturday, is set against the backdrop of changing political tides. That includes division between and within political parties. President Donald Trump's second administration currently engaged in a bare-knuckle fight with Kentucky Representative Thomas Massie.
I don't think Thomas Massie understands government. I think he's a grandstander, frankly. He'll probably vote. We don't even talk to him much. I think he should be voted out of office.
Longtime Senator Mitch McConnell is retiring, with multiple candidates vying for his seat. But none of them are pitching themselves as a continuation of McConnell's legacy.
It's garbage day in Kentucky. And thanks to Mitch McConnell, things have gotten dirty.
This week on the Crossroads Suncast, keeping alive a genteel Southern tradition amid a changing political landscape. I'm Bryce Patterson.
I wasn't aware of Fancy Farm, to be honest, before I started working here. But like every new reporter that starts working here, baptism by fire is to cover a Fancy Farm picnic. That's my first experience, baptism by fire. Going down there and being told what it is and then experiencing it is two different things.
For this week's episode, I'm joined by longtime Kentucky journalist and WPSD Local 6 anchor, Todd Faulkner.
You don't win a race at Fancy Farm, but you definitely will lose one.
That's a common refrain about the political side of the Fancy Farm picnic. Mark Wilson says the political tradition goes back a century or more.
St. Jerome Picnic has been going on since 1880. Of course, it started out as a gander pull-in, and they'd barbecue a sheep or hog or however many in the ground and stuff. And then through the early 1900s, the politicians, of course, they always notice a crowd.
According to Wilson, Alvin Barkley was the first politician to really bring Fancy Farm into the political spotlight. Born in Graves County, he served in both houses of Congress starting in 1913. In 1949, Barkley and Harry S. Truman moved to the White House. The Fancy Farm tradition? Tens of thousands of pounds of barbecue and so-called stump speeches.
I don't have to take 45 minutes to tell you about the record of Louis Nunn. When my opponent left office, Kentucky was 47th in the nation in education and 46th in the nation in per capita income.
A good stump speech is, in the traditional sense of the term, when people would get up on a tree stump in front of a crowd and you hammer home your message.
It's a different beast from the political speeches you'd see on the floor of Congress.
A stump speech is a whole lot more entertaining because they're speaking from the heart, and they inject a lot of humor in it, and they're just very animated, and it's kind of like a form of the old style revivals preaching.
Todd says there's a simplicity to stump speaking.
Maybe there's three things you want to get across. Boy, do you hammer that. 1, 2, 3. And then you hammer it again using maybe a little bit of a different language. 1, 2, 3. And then you finish it off Again, change the words up, 1, 2, 3. For me, it goes back to basic speeches. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them.
Speakers at Fancy Farm are expected to keep their talking time short. Speak too long, and you risk having your mic cut, and your voice drowned out by bluegrass music. There are other faux pas as well.
Jack Conway was speaking. I think he was running for governor, but don't hold me to it. It's been a lot of water under the creek bridge at Fancy Farm.
It's a packed house. Wilson says the local pastor and local bishop are on the platform with Conway. It's 2009, and he's serving as Kentucky's Attorney General.
He got so fired up in his oratory that he said the long word for I'm a mean SOB, but he said the whole word, which I'm not going to quote, obviously. What I vividly remember about that when the program was over, as the politicians and guest speakers were filing off the back ramp, I remember U.S. Senator Ford, and I was within earshot to hear this, and he said, Jack, you don't ever come down here and cuss.
That's what everybody was talking about. And how dare he come to this event and use that word? I mean, it's the little things that you can lose an audience.
Conway later issued a public apology for the incident. He lost the governor's race. The political landscape of Fancy Farm has changed over time, as the political landscape of the bluegrass state has shifted.
When I first started working here, the state of Kentucky was still very Democrat, okay? And now, shift forward 20 years, this is a red state through and through. And we can have the whole other conversation about how it's a red state with a Democratic governor. That's a whole other topic.
In some ways, those changes have accelerated in recent years.
Even within the Republican Party, there are divides. And so you see those come together at Fancy Farm. It's like, whoa, okay, you've got, let's just say what it is. You've got traditional Republican, you've got MAGA, and that's just in the last, 10 years, 8, 10 years.
That's especially true in West Kentucky.
It used to be we were the Gibraltar for the Democrat Party in far West Kentucky. And now the pendulum has swung the other way. Now we're predominantly red or Republican. Where it used to be, we would have 95% Democrats, elected officials. And now it's the other way, 95% Republicans.
Fancy Farm crowds have a history of raucous engagement, cheering and jeering in response to stump speeches.
We had some very animated stump speakers like Wendell Ford. He was an excellent speaker. He'd be up there holding a cigarette in his hand. And if the crowd got after him, boy, he'd get back at them now, and he'd take a puff off his cigarette and go on.
Wilson says he's felt a change over time.
I remember as a kid and even back before the 90s, it was generally local people and people from upstate who had a general love for politics or wanted to actually hear what they had to say. And we've seen it kind of sift down from the national political. If you'll notice our platform, mainly for the guests now under the pavilion, if you're standing on the platform, the left side is where all the Republicans sit. And the right side, if you're looking down from the platform, is where all the Democrats sit. And it's a very vivid line right up the middle. And we're even seeing more vitriol from our guests down there, some back and forth.
Todd has seen something similar.
There's always been the booing and the cheering, and that almost seems to be louder than ever, I'd say, over the last 5 to 10 years, in my opinion. And I don't know how to feel about that, because at the end of the day, aren't we there to hear the speeches? And yeah, I call it political theater, but let's see how the actor or actress does on the stage. Let's hear what they say.
This year's event has faced criticism for featuring almost exclusively Republican speakers. In part, that's because most of the invited Democrats declined this year. But Wilson says it's also an output of historical trends and the overall structure of the event.
We invite all the sitting elected officials in our district in Fancy Farm. So that's both U.S. senators, our local congressmen, our local legislators. So we invite who is on our ballot box. They think we just invite people all across the state. We don't even invite the other congressmen from other districts because they're not in ours. And some of the people give us kind of a hard time thinking that, well, y'all just inviting Republicans, and we're saying, now that's the elected officials. We can't control that.
Wilson says the rise of social media has also changed the role of Fancy Farm, allowing politicians to speak directly to their constituents in a way that was impossible in the past. This year's Fancy Farm also impacted by changes in federal spending. After cuts to public media funding, Kentucky Educational Television announced it would not be able to cover this year's Fancy Farm picnic.
I've been in news a long time, and there are things that are upsetting or take your breath away or are shocking or are hilarious. I remember sitting at my desk reading that KET wasn't going to be there. I literally out loud said, "Oh my God."
KET has offered coverage of Fancy Farm for decades. That includes offering live streams of the event and the speeches used by TV stations around the state. After a last-minute donation, KET announced on July 22nd that it would cover this year's Fancy Farm. Despite 145 years of changes, there are things that stay the same year after year. The food, the games, the roles of different families, and the focus on the community of Fancy Farm.
In a nutshell, the picnic is put on for charity by our parish, and then our local St. Jerome Parish will then plow that money back into the community for folks in need. We have what we call the St. Vincent de Paul Society, which is strictly charity, and that helps families out. If somebody were to get laid off at their job or having a hard time meeting their utility payments, picnic money goes into that and to help families out in need in the local community. And we may use it for upgrades on some of the facilities we have at our parish campus. All this money that's raised we put it in to good use for charity in our local area.
At its best, Wilson says the St. Jerome Fancy Farm picnic can be a unifier in divided times.
Whether you're a far left Democrat or a far right Republican or somebody in the middle, if you're at the table there eating good barbecue, fried chicken, all that, that's one thing we all have in common. There's a lot of civility in that dining room. Doesn't matter what part of the spectrum you're on. We want to be able to bring people together, while we're breaking bread and drinking good Southern sweet iced tea down there.
And as for the future,
I want our program to still be relevant to all parties, regardless of the political affiliation and ideology.
Todd says Fancy Farm is unique.
I think if an alien landed on planet Earth at Fancy Farm during that Saturday Fancy Farm picnic, I think they would just stand in awe of everything that's happening around them. They would try to process these groups of people that are either booing or cheering in front of these men and women getting up on this stage, barking back at them. And people are walking around with barbecue sandwiches and kids playing games, and they'd either grab a chair and sit down and say, "We got to witness this," or they'd get back on the ship and get the hell out of there.
Sound and video for this episode by Tejon Bumphus. Editing support from Jaden Sanders. For more Kentucky politics with Todd Faulkner, check out our episode on the life and legacy of Mitch McConnell. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts.